This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live.
This morning on the show, we are talking about mid-career teachers and how we can keep ourselves happy and safe when we have come so far, but there is still so long to go.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live. Tune in live at ttradio.org, or to join in the conversation, download the Podbean app and search Teachers Talk Radio. Follow the hashtag TTRadio. Tune in, talk it out with Teachers Talk Radio.
Good morning. This is the Saturday Breakfast Show here on Teachers Talk Radio with me, your host, Darren Lester. Today is Saturday, the 2nd of August, 2025. It is 9 a.m. How has your week been? Mine has been good. This morning I realized that I have been living a childhood dream without actually having kind of put that together until literally this morning. So I was doom scrolling before I got up. It had been quite a busy week this week, so I did stay in bed a little bit longer than I usually do on a Saturday morning. And I was just scrolling through my phone, and the theme tune, the titles to a Saturday morning show from when I was a kid came on. And it hit me with that kind of jolt of nostalgia. Now, I do feel like, as somebody that grew up in the early 90s, I had the pinnacle of Saturday morning TV. We had SMTV, which was my favourite of them all, I think. We had Live and Kicking, which I enjoyed. I resented it a little bit because there was one that I liked better, and ironically, I've forgotten the name of it, but it was set on like a space station. This was back in the time when the BBC would kind of trade off their Saturday morning kids light entertainment TV. So you would have like Live and Kicking would run for a few months, and then something else would come on to take its place, and all of the kind of programs that they showed were the same. All of the cartoons were the same. All of the kids' shows were the same. It was just the kind of linking sketches that were different. There was this one that I really liked, and it was set on a space station. And I think I remember there being like a big globby purple crystal thing that was basically the host. And that was my favourite one. Oh, Tim has texted in, good morning to you, Parallel 9, that's the one. That is it. I have been, for years, I had forgotten what that was called. Actually, to be fair, for years I had forgotten that it was a thing. But every time I kind of vaguely remembered it, I would be racking my brains. And there it is. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. If, like Tim, you are listening and you've got anything to add to the conversation today, if I've got a question that you can answer and kind of scratch that itch in my brain, then please do text in via the Podbean app, because I am incredibly happy to hear from you, particularly when you can answer a years-long question. So yeah, we have Parallel 9. That was my favourite. And then it would kind of trade off. And I remember, being 10, 11, 12 years old and wanting to be a Saturday morning kids TV presenter when I grew up. I was already acting at that time. I was already performing. So kind of as a profession, it wasn't new to me. That kind of wasn't an aspiration. It was what I was already doing. But I did very much want to present Saturday morning kids TV because I thought that would be the most fun job in the world. As it happens, it's probably a good job that I didn't go into Saturday morning kids TV presenting, given that Saturday morning kids TV doesn't exist anymore. I would be out of a job and would have been out of a job for a few years now. So I'm kind of glad that ultimately my life didn't take that path. But like I said, I was doom scrolling this morning, and the Live and Kicking theme tune came up on the app. It was just a short. I'm not even sure why it was there. It was probably one of those nostalgia accounts. And I thought, I had that hit of, oh yeah, I always wanted to be a Saturday morning kids TV presenter. It's a shame that didn't work out. And then as I was brushing my teeth and kind of going over the script for the show this morning, I finally put two and two together. And I was like, oh, I may not be a Saturday morning kids TV presenter, but I am a Saturday morning presenter. I'm here in that exact same time slot. I'm not quite as long as those shows were. They went on till about midday. And I don't think any of you would want to put up with me for 3 hours. I think an hour and a half is more than enough. But I'm in the time slot. I've got my news that I play. I have got my theme tune. I have got different things that I talk about. I am basically living that childhood dream, just in a slightly different format, in a slightly different way. And I think nostalgia is on my mind today. That's kind of what I've been thinking about this week as I've been prepping for today's show. I've been thinking about what it means to be in the middle. I've been thinking about what it means to be middle-aged. I've been thinking about what it means to be mid-career. And so, the nostalgia has been strong. The nostalgia has been heavy. But I've also, since brushing my teeth this morning, I've been thinking about how sometimes those dreams that you think you've forgotten about, or those dreams that you think you've given up on, or those dreams that you think weren't particularly realistic, and so, you didn't really do anything with them, they still manifest. They can still happen, and they quite often do still happen, albeit in a different way. I've spoken on the show before about how one of the games that I used to like to play as a kid, with the girl next door, was radio host. And we would, sit with a cassette recorder, and we would banter back and forth as if we were on the radio, and then play songs every so often, and kind of just act as if we were radio DJs. And that was never a real dream of mine. But again, it was always something that seemed a bit like fun. And that's kind of similar again to what I do here on a Saturday morning. So those childhood ambitions, those childhood dreams, I think they never really do go away. I've always had a bit of an issue with asking kids, oh, what do you want to be when you grow up? Because I think that, if we talk to them about dream jobs and careers and that sort of thing, which is what the question implies, even if it doesn't outright ask that, you are putting into their heads the idea that work is all there is. And, work should be fulfilling, and it can be fulfilling, but there are other things that we should encourage our kids to be. We should encourage them to want to be happy, to want to be surrounded by family. There are all sorts of things that we could have as a response to that question instead of a dream job. But work is important. We do spend a lot of our lives doing it. And I do think it's funny that a lot of those childhood dreams, they do often come true, just not always in the same way or in the same the same format that we imagined them when we were kids. So that's been quite nice this morning to realise and to think about. We are on the show today kind of talking about, we're talking about mid-career today. We're talking about what it is to be a mid-career teacher. But we will probably end up talking a lot about all of the middles of life. Like I said, about midlife. I turned 40 this year, a couple of months ago. And so, the idea of what it means to be in midlife has been on my mind quite a lot over the past few weeks. And so, yeah, I think this morning will be one for very much kind of indulging the nostalgia, indulging the things that we wanted when we were children that we then kind of forgotten about, but that we can definitely bring back into our lives now that we are adults.
Over 7,500 primary schools are already using Kapow Primary to boost confidence in teaching foundation subjects. Our expert-created curriculum planning, lessons and CPD are here to support and upskill you, whether you're a subject lead or classroom teacher. If you've got knowledge gaps in art, music, computing or beyond, we've got you covered. Head to kapowprimary.com and empower your teaching today.
Need a smarter way to teach? Wish your lessons had more impact? Eduflix.com. Stream educational films for teachers and students in or out of the classroom. Keep students engaged. No ads, no distractions. Try it free for 30 days at eduflix.com/try. Use code TTR. Get 50% off all orders made before June 1st. Eduflix.com.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy reading.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News.
Schools Week says Ofsted inspectors have criticised the organisation's demand that they complete more than 6 days of training ahead of the launch of the new framework in November. They say it is symptomatic of the rushed rollout of reforms. Ofsted has told school inspectors they must carry out at least 27.5 hours of online training, on top of 2 days of in-person and live online training announced previously. Those inspecting special schools or secondary schools must do more. The watchdog said its training package is the most comprehensive ever offered to inspectors, and that it was to ensure the successful rollout of inspections in November. Inspectors, however, said the watchdog was asking for a ridiculous level of preparation in a short space of time. Others criticised the fact that the training is unpaid. More detail can be found on Schools Week online. The Herald in Scotland says the Scottish Government has been criticised by teaching unions after it committed up to £1 million to the pursuit of a technological solution to the problem of teacher workload. Officials are seeking to drive the development of digital products that can reduce pressure on teachers. However, the EIS union demanded that the government delivers on an existing promise to reduce teachers' class contact time. The Teacher Workload Challenge is being sponsored by the Directorate for Learning and run by CivTech. In published materials for the new challenge, officials admit that workload, expectations and demands on teachers has increased and often exceed available working time. However, they also claim we don't know enough about how these manifest themselves for teachers, how they vary, and how teachers feel about the tasks. The EIS, however, point out that they have provided a great deal of data, including the results of a national survey on workload. Teachers in Scotland are currently being balloted for strike action over workload, and specifically the government's failure to yet honour a manifesto commitment to reduce class contact time by 90 minutes per week. More detail and comment from unions can be found online. Isolation rooms are back in the news after Schools Week covered the outcome of a court case after 3 pupils lodged complaints about what they say was an unpleasant and distressing isolation policy. A High Court justice said the policy was stigmatising and deliberately understimulating, but found the school had not crossed the boundaries of what the law or good practice permits. Despite the outcomes, the pupils are urging government to give serious consideration to what they call the now widespread and repeated use of isolation. In the judgment issued, the Justice noted that the schools had a distinctive mission and ethos to enhance the life opportunities of children, particularly those from disadvantaged or complicated backgrounds. Lawyers for the pupils said they were extremely disappointed by the outcome and that they are taking advice on an appeal. But they hope the case will shine a wider public light on the repeated use of isolation in mainstream schools. The BBC reports that 2 students who died in the Nottingham attacks in 2023 have been awarded posthumous degrees by the University of Nottingham. Barnaby Webber was awarded a history degree, accepted by his younger brother Charlie, whilst Grace O'Malley Kumar was awarded a Bachelor of Medical Science. Friends and family attended the ceremonies, with one friend commenting that it showed the lasting legacy of the pair. Finally, the BBC's Northern Ireland education correspondent reports that Sir Keir Starmer's former Chief of Staff, Sue Gray, has been appointed to the governing body of Queen's University Belfast. The position in the Senate of QUB comes without a salary. Ms Gray has been appointed a Pro-Chancellor, so she will attend ceremonies like graduations, with the university's Vice-Chancellor saying Pro-Chancellors play a crucial role in upholding the highest standards of accountability and leadership. More details on BBC Northern Ireland. This has been Teachers Talk Radio with News with Joe Fox.
I'm going to channel my inner boomer right now and share something with you that I saw on Facebook and haven't had the opportunity to verify. But I like it. So clearly I am growing old. This is attributed to Patricia Routledge, who turned 95 in February. That's kind of the reason that I'm inclined to believe it. Everything does kind of match up. Even if it's not written by Dame Routledge, I think she's a dame. The message behind it is quite nice and is kind of perfectly in keeping with what we're talking about today. So the message says, I'll be turning 95 this coming Monday. In my younger years, I was often filled with worry. Worry that I wasn't quite good enough, that no one would cast me again, that I wouldn't live up to my mother's hopes. But these days begin in peace and end in gratitude. My life didn't quite take shape until my 40s. I'd worked steadily on provincial stages, in radio plays, in West End productions, but I often felt adrift, as though I was searching for a home within myself that I hadn't quite found. At 50, I accepted a television role that many would later associate me with, Hyacinth Bouquet of Keeping Up Appearances. I thought it would be a small part in a little series. I never imagined that it would take me into people's living rooms and hearts around the world. And truthfully, that role taught me to accept my own quirks. It healed something in me. At 60, I began learning Italian, not for work, but so I could sing opera in its native language. I also learned how to live alone without feeling lonely. I read poetry aloud each evening, not to perfect my diction, but to quiet my soul. At 70, I returned to the Shakespeare stage, something I once believed I'd aged out of. But this time I had nothing to prove. I stood on those boards with stillness, and audiences felt that I was no longer performing. I was simply being. At 80, I took up watercolour painting. I painted flowers from my garden, old hats from my youth, and faces I remembered from the London Underground. Each painting was a quiet memory made visible. Now, at 95, I write letters by hand. I'm learning to bake rye bread. I still breathe deeply every morning. I still adore laughter, though I no longer try to make anyone laugh. I love the quiet more than ever. I'm writing this to tell you something simple. Growing old is not the closing act. It can be the most exquisite chapter, if you let yourself bloom again. Let these years ahead be your treasure years. You don't need to be famous. You don't need to be flawless. You only need to show up fully for the life that is still yours. With love and gentleness, Patricia Routledge. And I thought that was lovely. Lovely enough to share, even if I haven't been able to verify that Patricia wrote it herself. It is quite a trite sentiment, maybe these days. You know, the best is yet to come. 40 is the new 30. Growing older just means you're getting better. But just because it's trite doesn't mean that it's untrue. And I think that's something to hold on to, particularly, for those of us in my generation, the older millennials, the younger Gen X's, as we grow older, because we grew up being told that growing older was something to be scared of. We grew up where anybody over the age of 40 was kind of over the hill. And I think it's really important for us to be cognizant of the fact that that just isn't true. And that there is, hopefully, if we're lucky, still quite a lot of life left. I do worry for the younger generations, where that message is going to probably be even more profound, because they don't have the same culture of celebrity that we did. At least when we were growing up, you would watch TV, you would see films, you would listen to music as it was released, and you would see the older people. You would understand that people in their 40s, 50s, 60s, they had careers. But where our younger generations are mostly consuming social media these days, and where the algorithm does tend to reward the younger people, that's being closed off. I think the idea that you can continue to have a fulfilling life when you are older than 25, I don't think that's as prevalent to our younger generations anymore. And so I think, sentiments like Patricia's, just actively reminding us from somebody who has been there, from somebody who has been through it, that there is still a lot of great stuff to come. I think that's really important. And of course, we're going to recognize my bias that she talked about learning Italian at 60. And as a language teacher, I absolutely applaud that. And I think it's testament to the idea that I firmly believe that you can learn a language at any age. This idea that you have to learn a language when you're young is nonsense, quite frankly. Is it easier? Yes. Is it easier to learn a language when you're older if you would learn a different language when you were younger? Yes. I've recently learned Cornish, mostly so that I could teach it. My mum was interested in learning, and so I learned it in order to teach it. I've picked up a couple of languages that way. And it was more difficult to learn Cornish at, 39 than it was to learn Mandarin at 29, than it was to learn French when I was 11. But it's still doable. It's still doable. And I think, not only is that true of our brain's capacity to learn, of that elasticity, of that ability to take new information on board, I think it's also true of the way that we see things. If we say to ourselves, oh, no, I always wanted to learn Spanish, but I'm too old now at 30. You've got to learn a language when you're young. You're just limiting yourself. The only thing actually standing in your way then of learning Spanish is you. And for me, that's the biggest tragedy, I think, of aging, is that we do start to limit ourselves a lot more. We do start to think, oh, no, I can't do that because. Whereas, as Patricia shows us, you can do anything at any age. It really doesn't matter. And all of this has come about because I want to talk about mid-career teachers. Because I think quite often we are ignored in the research, in the training, in the discussions. There's a lot that is going on about teachers within their first 5 years, and that's all because of the retention and recruitment crisis. So we know that the bulk of teachers, but also the bulk of teacher leavers will leave within the first 5 years of their career. So there is a lot of research, there's a lot of discussion about those years and how we can make those years sustainable so that people remain in the profession. At the other end of the scale, there's a lot of talk about retirement and about what happens kind of later on in the career, not necessarily within teaching, but within the zeitgeist in general. In fact, yesterday I've been doom scrolling quite a lot this week. I've just realized as I'm sitting here talking to you, because every single one of these stories seems to start with the phrase, I was doom scrolling. I need to do something about that. I need to delete some apps, I think. But I was doom scrolling earlier in the week again as I was putting this show together, and there was a lot of talk about raising the pension age, and winter fuel allowances are coming back into discussion, despite the fact that it's August. But I suppose because people will start thinking about their Q4 bills. And there was one lady who, in her mid-60s, kind of phoned into this call-in show, and she was incensed. She was raging because she had been promised retirement at 60, and the age had been pushed up to 67. And I get that. I get that she was angry because she had been promised one thing and then that had changed. She had lived her life thinking that she would retire at 60, and then that age just kept being pushed up and up and up. I get why she was angry. But I also thought what a privilege that was for her to have spent such a long time believing that she could retire at 60. What a privilege it is, let's be honest, for her to believe that she'll be able to retire at 67. Because I'm sitting here at 40, not entirely convinced that I will be able to retire at all, if I'm honest. I think that I will have to keep working. I don't think I will be able to keep teaching. I don't think I will be able to be a teacher at 70, at 75, at 80, if, God willing, I'm lucky enough to get there. But I do think that I will have to keep working. Because as we see the state pension being pushed up and up and up, and I've still got, at least 30 more years to go until I get there, I'm not convinced that there will be a state pension age. And I have not paid into any private pension. No, that's not true. I've paid into one private pension. I paid into the county council pension when I first started teaching. And I got my statement the other day that tells me I will get a grand total of £60 a year. So, can't wait for that. But I chose not to pay into any other teachers' pension schemes. Again, because I wasn't entirely sure that there would be an age where I could retire. So to me, it didn't seem like it was worth the payment sacrifice. Now, let's just keep in mind that I am incredibly bad with money. So this is not financial advice. Okay, seek actual financial advice. Do not take my word for it because I'm poor. But yeah, we've got lots of talk about what happens at the beginning of your career. Lots of talk about what happens at the end of your career if you are lucky enough to get to the end of your career. But very little discussion about what happens in the middle. So that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about this idea of mid-career and what Sarah Mercer and her colleagues have termed the happiness curve. So this was actually a paper that I had pulled out for TTI Journal Club. Just in case you are an MFL teacher and you are not subscribed, you are not a member of Journal Club, please do head over to the TTI website and sign up to our mailing list for Journal Club. Every month you receive an article straight into your inbox and an invite to a Zoom meeting where a whole bunch of us sit and discuss it. We are a group of about 70 MFL teachers with varying numbers of people who actually come to the live discussion every month. But we are a strong, vibrant community and I would love to have you on board. But anyway, I pulled this out for Journal Club, but I thought actually it made sense to talk about it with a bit of a wider audience. So Sarah Mercer was looking specifically at mid-career of language teachers. But a lot of what she says is true for everybody, regardless of your subject. So that's kind of what we're going to focus on today. It seems to me, and it seems to Sarah, that one of the biggest issues with talking about mid-career teaching is not actually being able to define mid-career. Because, of course, it's going to depend on when you came into teaching. So I came into teaching pretty much straight from uni. I'd done a year abroad, as most people who study languages do. I did a 3-year education degree. I did a B.Ed. And so I came into teaching at the age of 21, 22. And so I have been in teaching for almost 20 years, about 18 years. I think I'm about to go into year 19. So I would say if I stay in teaching for my entire career, and if we say that if we take that lady's retirement age of 60, then I'm mid-career because I'm kind of there in the middle. If I have to teach until I'm 70, we've probably got about 5 or 6 years until I am right slap bang in the middle. So if you are a straight out of uni teacher and you are going to teach throughout your entire working life, you are probably a mid-career teacher after 23, 24, 25 years. But if you're a career changer, if you've been an accountant for 20 years, and then at 40, you fancy a bit of a change and you go on to train to be a PE teacher, then your mid-career is going to be after 13, 14, 15 years. If we're talking about chronologically what is in the middle of your career. And there's a lot of difference, I think, between a teacher who has been teaching for 12 years and a teacher who has been teaching for 20 years. I think those 8 years contain a lot of experience. They contain a lot of discussion. They contain a lot of training. They contain a lot of going back and forth over pedagogies. And so I don't think that's the same career phase at all, despite the fact that you might both be considered mid-career teachers. If you are a second career teacher and you are 45 and you make the change, maybe you're 46, 47 by the time you step foot in a classroom, you are probably mid-career in terms of the number of years that you are working while being an ECT, an early career teacher. So as with everything, and I say this as a linguist, the terminology that we use, the language that we use can be a bit messy. It can be a bit muddled. So I did a bit of research, not a lot, granted, but I did a little bit into how the literature in teaching defines mid-career teachers. And I thought this was really interesting because it varies, right, from 8 to 23 years of experience. So depending on who you talk to, you could be considered a mid-career teacher in year 8. But you will also be considered a mid-career teacher in year 15. And you will also be considered a mid-year teacher in year 23. That's quite a big span of time, isn't it, realistically? And if I think back onto my career, if I think about when I was in my 8th year, and we compare that to now at the end of my 18th year, my practice has changed radically since then. I am a much better teacher now than I was in my 8th year. I'm a much better teacher now than I was 5 years ago. A lot of that is to do with the choices that I've made, to do with the training that I've undertaken, to do with the fact that I've engaged recently a lot more with literature, with training, with CPD, so I've learned a lot. And so I suppose if somebody had undertaken that same engagement in their 8th year that I've just done, maybe, we could say that our experiences were comparable. But I've also got all of that extra time actually within the classroom, meeting different types of students, meeting personality types that I'd never met before, because children change so quickly. 5 years ago, I wasn't as worried about attention spans. I was still concerned, but I wasn't as concerned about attention spans as I am now. Because 5 years ago, short form media wasn't as prevalent as it is now. 5 years ago, the kids were still generally watching long form content on YouTube. They were still consuming brain rot. They were still consuming YouTube content. But it was 15-minute videos, 20-minute videos, as opposed to 1-minute videos. And so a lot changes in these short spans. And so I do think we do teachers a bit of a disservice by having this massive range being considered mid-career. And I think actually we probably need to take mid-career and break it up into other sections. But even if we do that, again, it doesn't really take into account the career changers. It doesn't really take into account the career breakers. You know, if you've got somebody who has taken a sabbatical for a couple of years, you know, maybe they were head of MFL, they wanted to introduce Italian into their school, so they took a year out to do Italian at university and go and live in Milan for 6 months. Does that year count in their career or not? And of course, for people who choose to have children who will take parental leave, you've got to think about whether that's going to count. We get really into the weeds when we start thinking about these definitions. But it is important too, because if we don't recognise teachers at different stages of their careers, if we don't recognise that a teacher in their 8th year has very different needs to a teacher in their 20th year, who has very different needs to a teacher in their 40th year, and we just lump everybody together in this term mid-career, then it's no wonder that we get the attrition. It's no wonder that we get the burnout. It's no wonder we get the people starting to be jaded, because their needs are not being met. They as individual teachers are not being looked after. And that is what's really important. That's where this idea of the happiness curve comes from. This idea that there are peaks and troughs in how you feel about your career, how you feel about the profession. And they're going to come at different points within your career. So we've got this massive span of what it means to be a mid-career teacher. Day and Gu, who are very quickly becoming some of my favourite researchers, I must say, they're cropping up everywhere as I'm doing more and more reading. They kind of split it into year 8 to year 15 being called the watershed. And then if you make it to year 16 and you go up to year 23, those are the years that you are most confident and most committed to the profession. And I found that really interesting. So Day and Gu, they do a lot of work with teachers. They do a lot of interviews with teachers. Most of their research comes from talking to teachers. They're fantastic researchers. And I love the fact that they have sat down with teachers from across their careers. They have spoken to these teachers, and they have found that if you make it to year 16, you are the most committed that you have been within your entire career. And it kind of stands to reason, doesn't it? It sounds a bit like common sense, because you've stuck with it for 16 years, so of course you're going to be committed. But how often do we focus on, again, those year 1 to 5 teachers and their commitment and what they put in? How often do we talk about how committed our ECTs are, because they will stay after school to get everything done? They will volunteer for things because they're young and eager, and they want to get the most out of it. They want to do all the stuff that we did when we were newly qualified teachers. And they should be applauded for that. They should be lauded for that. I'm not saying that they shouldn't be. But how often is talk of commitment limited to that beginning stage of your career and ignored when you get into the upper stage of your career, taken for granted when you get to the upper stages of your career? When in fact the research is showing us that you are at your most committed in years 16 to 23. And this is why we need to solve the retention and recruitment crisis, not just because it will reduce class sizes, not just because it will improve workload, not just because it's better for the kids, but because we get our best teachers, we get our most committed teachers, we get our most confident teachers in the latter middle stages of their career. And if we want good teachers, if we want a strong education system, that's what we need: confident and committed teachers. What's interesting, though, according to all of the research that I looked at, is that this mid-career part, that kind of watershed to confidence part, it's a time of renegotiation. Mid-career teachers generally are navigating, that was my carbon monoxide detector, which is a little bit scary. But given that it just beeped instead of setting off an alarm, I'm sure it's fine, but I will just keep an eye on it. If I just randomly go off air, then you'll know why. What was I saying? Yeah, so mid-career teachers, we are in this period of navigating our personal and professional maturity. Not sure anybody would accuse me personally of being mature, but, I'm just going on what the research says. We are thinking about mastery, and we are thinking about meaning. I think I'm just going to play the ads and kind of remove the carbon monoxide alarm. I'm reading no particles, so I think that's fine. I'm sure it's just the battery running out. But yeah, let's just, because that beeping, I don't know if you can hear it, but that beeping is absolutely going to annoy me.
Over 7,500 primary schools are already using Capel Primary to boost confidence in teaching foundation subjects. Our expert-created curriculum planning, lessons and CPD are here to support and upskill you, whether you're a subject lead or classroom teacher. If you've got knowledge gaps in art, music, computing or beyond, we've got you covered. Head to capelprimary.com and empower your teaching today.
Need a smarter way to teach? Wish your lessons had more impact? Eduflix.com. Stream educational films for teachers and students in or out of the classroom. Keep students engaged. No ads, no distractions. Try it free for 30 days at eduflix.com/try. Use code TTR. Get 50% off all orders made before June 1st. Eduflix.com.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy reading.
This is how you know we're live here on Teachers Talk Radio, because things go wrong, things don't quite work out as you expect, and you deal with them. I love it. I never ever understood why, when things happened on live TV, they would always make that "this is how you know we're live" joke. But now doing it for myself, I completely understand, because I think it's good that that things occasionally go a little bit awry, that beeps happen that you've got to take care of. Just so that you know that I am actually here with you on a Saturday morning, sharing our breakfast, talking about mid-career teaching. So, as I was saying, in the middle, we are negotiating lots of different things. We're also negotiating lots of different things in our personal lives. So, the research into things like when people get married, when people have kids, when people buy houses, that is all showing us that that's happening later and later in life. I read something, I wasn't doom scrolling this time. I can't remember how I read it, but I read something earlier in the week that said the average age to buy a house, to buy your first house in the UK now is 39. Whereas, back in the 70s, the 80s, you would kind of get married at 21, 22, and then kind of expect to be able to walk into your first house. Even if it were a council house, that you kind of never had any intention or ability to buy, let's say this was like pre-Maggie Thatcher selling all of the houses off, you at least felt a sense of security within your house at 21, 22. Whereas now that's been pushed right up to 39. I reckon, I turned 40 this year. I reckon it's going to be another 10-ish years before I buy. Which, again, I put down to the fact that I'm rubbish with money, and I would rather buy outright than have a mortgage. So I've got, I'm saving. Good old ISAs. But where all of these things are being pushed later and later and later, it does mean that these days middle career teachers are more likely to be the ones dealing with them than early career teachers. We're seeing the age that people get married happen later, if they're choosing to get married at all. We're seeing the ages that people have children be pushed later. So maternity leaves and all that sort of thing, that's all happening later on in their career. So in this mid-career phase, there's all sorts of stuff that is going on personally while we are becoming more confident professionally. And so it seems to me that a big thing we need to do to kind of focus on the well-being of the mid-career teachers is to acknowledge that they've got all sorts of stuff happening in their personal lives. Help them to juggle, to balance the personal and the professional. Because that way we can retain their professional experiences. We can retain all of that good stuff that has come from the increased confidence, from the commitment that they have, or that we have, I suppose. I shouldn't other mid-career teachers, because that's exactly where I am. Darren, that's the point of the show. Come on. One of the best findings of this piece of research called Riding the Happiness Curve showed that out of the mid-career teachers who were interviewed, almost all of them suggested this growth in confidence in the mid-career phase. Many of them said that compared to their early years, they felt more competent, they felt more efficient, they felt more emotionally balanced in their classrooms. And, from my point of view, I would say the same thing. I feel a lot more competent as a teacher now than I did when I first started, than I did in year 5 when I changed schools and even changed phases. Year 5 was the year that I transitioned from primary exclusive to teaching primary and secondary. I feel more competent than I did in year 10 than in year 15. So, that certainly tracks with my experience. They feel more efficient, which I also think is true. Not necessarily in the way that we might think of efficiency. It's not about reusing resources. It's not about, I laminated these flashcards in my first year, and now even though I think they would be better on the interactive whiteboard, I'm still going to use my flashcards because I've already made them. It's not about that. It's about understanding what is most important in a lesson, understanding what is most important on your PowerPoint, understanding what the children actually need, and being able to deliver that. And it's that efficiency that comes from the understanding, that comes from, the decoration of my PowerPoint actually isn't very important. Or in fact, the decoration of my PowerPoint can distract from the whole point of my lesson. It can lead to that cognitive overload. And I know about cognitive overload because I did some training in year 12 about it. And I remember that. It helps everything to happen faster. Or even if not faster, more efficiently. And I do think that you feel more emotionally balanced, because I think that a lot of your teacher identity is embedded by that point. Now, I talk a lot about teacher identity on the shows. It is one of my interests as a teacher researcher. And in fact, one of the very first shows that I did here on Saturday Breakfast was about teacher identity. So, if you're at a loss of things to do this week, then please do go back through the archives and find that, because it is a show that I'm very, very proud of. But who you are as a teacher, who you want to be as a teacher, is a process. It's a process of becoming. And I think when you start as a teacher, when you are an ECT, that process is very difficult because of the amount of brain space, the amount of bandwidth that you are having to dedicate to everything else, because everything is brand new. And so, a lot of ECTs talk about feeling like they are just trying to survive, which is fair. But by the time you get to mid-career and you have managed to streamline your processes, so everything is more efficient, as the research is suggesting, that's when you can really think about who you are as a teacher, either deliberately or not. You can either choose to be a certain type of teacher. I'm the teacher that dishes out Haribo. I'm the teacher that dishes out detention. Or you can just let it come. That's kind of entirely up to you. But we are more secure with who we are as teachers, with what we look like as teachers. We are also more emotionally regulated because the workload isn't as heavy. The workload is still heavy, don't get me wrong. I don't want anyone coming for me in the comments telling me that that teaching is difficult. I'm in the classroom, I know. But I also know that it was harder when I was an NQT as it was back then. I know that it was harder in my first 5 years than it is now. And so because I'm not staying up until midnight making resources anymore, because I'm not spending my Saturdays reading all of the textbooks to try and find the exact phrasing that I want for my lesson, because I now know that it would be faster if I just wrote it myself, and I'm confident enough in my ability to explain to write it myself, I am better rested, and so I am more emotionally regulated. Emotional regulation has become this kind of buzzword in teaching, hasn't it, over the past, 2 years? And we talk a lot about making sure that our young people are emotionally regulated. We don't talk very much about making sure that our teachers are emotionally regulated. And it is that lack of concern for teachers. It's the hypocrisy, I think, of knowing that we need to look out for these things because we do it for our young people, but assuming that for our adults, we just need to introduce mandatory yoga and that will all make everything okay. That grates on most people. So in this research, in Riding the Happiness Curve, a teacher named Elena, so these are all pseudonyms, she was an Austrian teacher, so this such international research, which I found really interesting, said that she didn't worry anymore about conflicts with head teachers or with parents, because at this stage of her career, in the mid stage of her career, she had confidence in her professional judgment. So if a parent came back to her and said, I don't agree with how you graded this essay, I don't agree with the fact that you gave my daughter detention for using her phone in your lesson. Head teacher observes her and says, oh, I don't agree with how you taught that vocabulary. Elena isn't worried about that anymore, isn't as worried about that anymore, because she has confidence in what she does. That takes a lot of the emotional toll out of teaching. Now, I'm not saying that you need to believe that your way is the only way, because I think that's dangerous. I've said this on the show before. I think the minute that you think as a teacher you have reached the pinnacle and you have nothing more to learn is when you should retire. But I think it is a relief to have confidence. It is a relief to be able to go, no, actually, I've read the research, I've taught this enough in my life, I've married those two things together, because I don't think research alone is enough to give confidence, and I don't think practice alone is enough to give confidence, because I think practice can quite often lead to confirmation bias. But if you marry the two and you go, no, actually, this is what is best, and you have confidence in that, it makes everything that little bit easier. Rachel, who is a teacher from England, said that she used to exhaust herself over preparing lessons. But now her focus is on what actually matters for student learning. And I think, again, that is true. I think we all, as newly qualified teachers, get caught up in the aesthetics of our lessons. And while that's lovely, you know, the colour photocopying is really, really nice. The very carefully cut out dominoes game is amazing. Is it necessary? Did you need to spend ages searching for a coloured picture to go on your worksheet, or is the worksheet enough? Now, if you are a teacher who is concerned about aesthetics, and in fact I did a show about teacher aesthetics, I don't know, it may have been this time last year. Actually, I was going to say recently, but it may have been this time last year. I did a whole show about whether or not classrooms need to be Instagrammable. So if you are interested in teacher aesthetics, please do go back again through the archives and find that one. But if you are a teacher interested in aesthetics and that's what you want to do, fantastic. Please do it. Because ultimately, you are the one teaching your lesson. You are the one living in your classroom. And so you've got to be really happy with what is in your lesson, with how your lesson is going. So do what brings you joy. But if you're not a particularly aesthetic person, if you're not that bothered about what your worksheet looks like, so long as it's legible, so long as it's on the right colour for your dyslexic pupils, and that's it, then you don't have to spend a long time making those aesthetic resources. You can just have a plain worksheet. That's fine. So do what brings you happiness. Do what's going to make you feel most confident in your classroom. But remember, the only thing that really matters is whether your pupils are learning. Everything else is secondary. Now, according to Bandura and his theory on self-efficacy, that is, our belief in our own ability, confidence is one of the most important psychological resources that we can draw on because it helps with our persistence. It helps with our resilience. Interestingly, it helps us to try out new things, which kind of seems a bit counterintuitive because it feels like if you're confident in your abilities, if you're confident in what you do in the classroom, then you're just going to keep doing that because you believe it works. But actually, if you're confident in your ability to teach, then you are going to try new things because you believe that you can pull it back if you get it wrong. If you try out a new game in your classroom and it completely falls apart, you know that you can get that class back together and back on track very, very quickly. If you're trying a new type of activity and you realize halfway through the activity it's not working, you have that ability to stop the lesson, to stop the activity, bring the kids back together and go, guys, I'm really sorry. I thought that would be good. I thought that would work. Clearly I got that wrong. Let's try this a different way. And you can think on your feet, even if you haven't prepared a backup plan. You can think of another way to teach that same concept. And self-efficacy, that belief in your own ability, according to Bandura, and if you don't know Bandura, I highly recommend going and looking at his work because self-efficacy theory is really interesting, both in terms of us as teachers, or just us as adults in general, and for our kids as well. There's a lot of research about self-efficacy in children, which I think is well worth looking at. But here's the twist, okay? Confidence doesn't mean comfort. They are not the same thing. Confidence grows, but so does complexity. So does complexity of life. So does complexity of what mid-career teachers are dealing with. And this is why we need to be very careful. We need to be very deliberate when we are talking to our mid-career teachers, when we are helping them to get the very best out of their careers.
Over 7,500 primary schools are already using Capel Primary to boost confidence in teaching foundation subjects. Our expert-created curriculum planning, lessons and CPD are here to support and upskill you, whether you're a subject lead or classroom teacher. If you've got knowledge gaps in art, music, computing or beyond, we've got you covered. Head to capelprimary.com and empower your teaching today.
Need a smarter way to teach? Wish your lessons had more impact? Eduflix.com. Stream educational films for teachers and students in or out of the classroom. Keep students engaged. No ads, no distractions. Try it free for 30 days at eduflix.com/try. Use code TTR. Get 50% off all orders made before June 1st. Eduflix.com.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy reading.
So, a lot of the issues that actually were coming up for these mid-career teachers professionally were to do with career development. So a lot of the teachers in Sarah's study were juggling a lot more than classroom teaching. They were also mentors, they were also department heads, they were also curriculum developers, examiners, counsellors. You know, there was all sorts going on professionally outside of the classroom. So this one teacher, Simon, he is a teacher of English and French in Austria. He talked about his growing seniority, which is great for him. It was bringing him new duties. Fantastic. Probably bringing him a bit of a pay rise as well, which is what we always like. And he found some of those new duties, some of those new things really energizing, but he found others exhausting. And that was a common pattern throughout a lot of the teachers that took part in this research. As teachers become more experienced, schools start to lean on them, understandably. You know, you want a department head who is experienced in teaching. I became a department head just this academic year. So, you know, again, in my 18th year. And quite frankly, I don't think I was ready before this year. I don't think that I could have handled the responsibility of it before this year. But I think it's fair and it's right that as teachers become more experienced, we are leaned on a lot more. But that also means that we need support. Because these new things, these new career phases, department head, examiner, curriculum developer, mentor, whatever it may be, those are new things to us. You know, just as teaching as a whole is a new thing to our ECTs. And so we still need that support. We still need that understanding because we are taking on something new. And I think quite often that's what is missing, is the support of teachers who are stepping outside of the classroom to take on these extra responsibilities that the school need. Schools need heads of department, schools need mentors, schools need examiners. But quite often you take on that responsibility and then you are left to it. And you are left to find your own CPD. You are left to track down the Zoom meeting for heads of department. You are left to try and make connections with other heads of your subject in catchment, so that you can build that network. When I do think that senior leaders could be doing a lot more to support those staff, instead of just assuming that because they are confident teachers, they can step right in to be confident heads of department. These teachers then quite often will be seen as the dependable ones. They will be seen as the ones that can manage, because they do manage, because they make it look quite easy. They're like swans, very serene on the surface, and then madly paddling underneath. But because they make it look easy, more responsibility is given to them. How many teachers have you met, and you may even be a teacher, who has multiple areas of responsibility? Maybe you are a classroom teacher who is also a form tutor, who is also a head of year 8, who is also head of physics, who is also head of science. And maybe you've got all of those responsibilities because you are dependable, because you are capable, because you can manage. But that's a lot of stuff to be in charge of, particularly if you've got no additional support. And this is something that schools often forget. Mentoring, leadership roles, even just running trips, all of those things are additional jobs, not just kind of extra bits that can be absorbed casually. Tom and I quite recently did a live show about educational visits, and we talked a lot in that conversation about how running a trip is another job, and how actually if you can get involved with these providers who will make that easier for you, who will support you, who will make suggestions, who will do the bulk of the admin, that makes running a trip so much easier. Again, please do go back through the archives to find that show, because that was a fun conversation. I enjoyed that one. But we are given all of these extra jobs, which could feasibly be somebody's full-time job. And yet we are expected just to absorb them. We are expected to cope because that's what we do. Let's talk about mindset for a second. Now, I'm going to be honest, I have an issue with growth mindset. I've had an issue with growth mindset for quite a long time. Because I sat in an inset once where the guy was talking about growth mindset. He was talking about how great it was. And I was interested in what he was saying. You know, I like to keep an open mind about these things. I like educational research. I like changing up my practice. So I Googled him. I Googled the guy who was speaking. And I found his blog. And I found that on his blog, his most recent post that was written not long before coming to our school to talk about growth mindset was about how growth mindset doesn't work and how it's not a thing. And so then I became a bit jaded about growth mindset, because I had this guy telling me that it was great in inset while he was writing about how it wasn't so great and how it wasn't actually real. And so even though I know that you do have to be careful with CPD providers, and I say this as somebody who would like eventually to become one, and I know that this can happen with all sorts of CPD providers, that left me with a bad taste in my mouth about growth mindset specifically. So I have kind of ignored the growth mindset conversation, I'm going to be honest. I don't know whether it is still as big a thing as it was a few years ago when I sat through that inset, or whether that guy's blog post ended up taking off, and now we're all agreed that it's not a thing. But if we are thinking about growth mindset, we also have to remember that that's not just a thing for the kids, it's a thing for us as well. Emotional regulation is not just a thing for the kids, it's a thing for us as well. Everything that we teach to our young people, about being human, is just as applicable to us. So, what was quite interesting in Sarah's study was that all of the teachers interviewed did demonstrate a growth mindset per Carol Dweck's definition. They were really interested in professional learning. They really wanted to get better. They really wanted to understand new policy. They really wanted to stretch their skills. So Kira, who was a teacher in the UK, she was preparing to teach a level of German that was higher than anything she had taught before. And her attitude was, I'm really looking forward to this challenge. Ellie said that teaching gave her and I love this phrase, a constant development backstage. There's something, probably the actor in me really likes this idea that there is always some behind the scenes going on, that you can always change, you can always improve. Monica described how she learns to teach better every single year. And so, whether or not we're going to agree with the concept of growth mindset, whether or not we're going to believe that believing that you can do something is better than actually doing it, there is this idea that a mindset of curiosity, a mindset of ongoing growth, is a really crucial buffer against burnout, because it helps us to find meaning even when the systemic conditions are difficult. A couple of weeks ago on the show, this show has just become 90 minutes of me plugging other shows that I've done, hasn't it? But another show that I did a couple of weeks ago was all about how things never change. And we looked at how educational thinkers in the 1600s were making the exact same complaints that we're making today in 2025. And I think one of the things that you see as a mid and later career teacher is the cycle. It is the new things coming back round but being rebranded. And quite often as teachers, we frame this negatively, don't we? We frame it as, oh, we've seen it all before. We frame it as, oh, this is just theory X in a different shirt and tie. But the fact of the matter is, we can take what is being re-delivered to us as best practice, this new, in inverted commas, theory. Look at why it's come back. What has the research said that means that it should come back? Why does it work? Combine it with what we knew before and come up with something better. It's all about how we choose to frame it. We can either choose to sit in the inset and complain because we've sat through this same inset 15 times, and that is an issue. I'm not going to lie, that is an issue. Because if we're just doing the same thing over and over again, we're never going to get better. We're never going to learn new things. Or we can take it as an opportunity to learn from when we taught it the first time, remember what went right and what went wrong. So we've got that solid foundation of this new, in inverted commas, pedagogy. And then jump into what is actually new. Really investigate what is actually new about it, because we have already got those foundations. Interestingly, from this research, many teachers in England, particularly German teachers, So, shout out to all my fellow Germanists out there. A lot of German news is quite often depressing because we're told about how kids aren't learning German and about how, ours is a dying language and all that sort of thing. But it was found that the German teachers specifically took their growth mindset out beyond the classroom. And it was by mid-career that they were starting to get involved in advocacy work. They were involved in the unions. They were the ones who were fighting to raise the status of language education in policy. Now, is there a potentially self-serving reason for that? Is it because German is endangered as a language that we teach in England, and so by becoming involved, by advocating, by raising the status, they are fighting to keep their own jobs? Possibly. But they are also the ones who understand why this is important. They are the ones who have also had to think about why their language specifically is important, and so have had to think about the language landscape as a whole. So they're the ones who have gone and done the research to see where German fits. They're the ones who have looked at the data and so have a really good understanding of why language learning as a whole is important. It's been a little while since I've taught German. I say that, it's been about a year since I last taught German. And I will be very honest, I fight for German, love German. German is a very, very important subject. But one of the things I always think when I'm told about its declining status is self-serving, because I always think, I've got 8 other languages that I can teach. That's okay. For me, that's fine. But if I understand why, if German is your sole language that you teach, why you would want to fight that. And again, you have the emotional capacity, you have that bandwidth, you have that ability to go out and fight, because teaching is that little bit easier for you now, because you're not staying up until midnight preparing lessons anymore. So again, this is why we need to invest in our middle career teachers, because they can do more. They can go beyond the classroom. And nothing is ever going to change about education in this country if we don't have people in the classroom also fighting outside of it. And that's really difficult. That is really difficult, particularly for those of you who have spouses and children, and you're worrying about paying the mortgage, and you are worrying because Johnny has got a birthday party next week, and you've got to remember not just to take him to the birthday party, but also to go and buy a gift. And, everything's really expensive these days. So, there is a lot outside of school that can interfere and that can stop that. But there are also lots of us who, for whatever reason, don't have those same responsibilities, don't have those same concerns, and so do have the bandwidth to do the research, to do the advocacy. And we should be supported in doing that, because it is best for education on a massive scale, on a much wider scale. So, beyond the classroom then, we have got this confidence, we've got this growth mindset. But beyond that, one thing that really stood out from this study was the fact that teachers find immense meaning in what they do. Over and over again, the teachers that Sarah interviewed described finding joy in how their students develop. They found joy in knowing that they had opened up somebody's mind to another language. So these were language teachers who were interviewed. They found joy in exposing children to other cultures, to other ways of seeing the world. Mara spoke about giving students a bit of my love for languages, which I think is lovely, because that's what I strive for, to share my interest the fact that I think languages are really interesting. I want the children to feel that same way. Elena said that watching her students mature over the 4 years that she taught them was one of the greatest sources of satisfaction in her job. And this all relates back to what psychologist Martin Seligman identifies in the PERMA model of well-being. So, finding joy, finding satisfaction in what you do for a living is important for your own well-being. And quite often we do try and separate out the two, don't we? I've talked about this before, about how a lot of conversations about teacher well-being and teacher burnout end up being about reducing what teachers do. Let's take them out of the classroom a bit more, give them a bit more PPA time. Let's have AI do our marking. But that doesn't really help. All that actually is going to do is increasing stress, because you don't really know how well your students are doing. You don't have that overview of your classes. So helping teachers to find satisfaction in their profession, that is one of the best things that we can do for well-being, for increasing how our middle teachers feel. So far, this show has all been very positive. I framed it as we're going to talk about how we can improve the well-being of our mid-career teachers. And with just 10 minutes left of my slot, everything's been really good. I've been talking about how great we are. But let's just come back a little bit to the juggle. Almost all of the teachers in this report said that they were having to balance multiple demands, not just at school, but also at home. So again, where people are having children a lot later in life, that means that it tends to be mid-career teachers having their first, second child, and having that demand on top of their teaching. Where we are buying houses a bit later, and everybody knows that moving house is the most stressful thing that a person can do. Where that's happening later, that's happening in mid-career. By the time we hit mid-career, regardless of how we frame that, our parents are aging. And we may be taking on more responsibility for them, either overtly caring for them or just checking in a little bit more with them to make sure that everything is okay, to make sure that they are managing. You may have a partner who have got their own career and all of the stresses that come with that. And, your conversations with them may boil down to you offloading about your day, them offloading about their day, and then going to bed because you're both exhausted. And it becomes a little bit harder to find the joy in the grind of daily life. Alison, a teacher in England in this report, said that her school responsibilities had become so all-consuming that she barely had time for her own children. Rose had shelved plans for her PhD so that she could care for her family. Mia talked about how when her children were younger, she found enormous stress in trying to balance teaching and parenting. And this is a systemic issue. If it were just one of these people, if it were just Rose talking about how difficult that was, then we could say to Rose, okay, you clearly need some help. Let's have a look at this. But the fact that it's everybody saying that they are finding managing the personal struggles of being in middle age, mid-career, with the professional growth, the professional expectations that come from that stage, that means that the issue is systemic. It's built within our system. Work-life balance, as I've said, is not about time management. I don't care what anybody says. It's not about time management. Saying to somebody, oh, you need to learn your time, you need to learn to manage your time better, is not going to help their work-life balance for all sorts of reasons. But if you need a reason, let's just point out the fact that it's actually ableist to suggest that work-life balance is going to improve somebody else's that time management is going to improve somebody else's work-life balance, because time blindness is a very common symptom of ADHD. Work-life balance comes from expectation. It comes from how schools recognise or don't recognise the reality of the lives of their staff. So because mid-career teachers are seen professionally as reliable, resilient, endlessly capable, they are given all of this extra professional responsibility, but they are also very human. They also need support. They also need help. And so, as researchers like Brady and Wilson point out, well-being is undermined when people are pulled in too many directions without support or flexibility. If you want your mid-career teacher to be a classroom teacher and a form tutor and a head of department and a head of faculty and lead a trip, you need to give them some help. Or you hire 5 different people, one for each of those things. Let's be honest, we all know which of those options is cheaper. So schools need to be very careful that they are giving institutional support to their mid-career staff, not just paying lip service to them. The research is very clear that mid-career teachers need help. They need flexible scheduling where possible, when they are caring for their children or their parents. Now, let's be honest, no teacher, particularly if you've reached mid-career, and so you are demonstrably, according to the research, more committed than you have been at any other point in your career so far. No one's going to go to their head and say, oh, I just need to be able to walk out of my classroom whenever I like. That's just not going to happen. And so it doesn't hurt if somebody says, oh, actually, is it okay if I don't ever teach period 1 because I like to be able to call into my parents and help my mum get dressed before I come into school? If that's going to help them, if that's going to make their life easier, then I think that should be a deliverable. I think that is something that can be done. The flip side, of course, is that there needs to be equity in it. You can't have a blanket rule, everybody in school needs to be here by 8:15, but then say to one person, oh yeah, it's fine, you don't have to come in until the beginning of period 2. So you do need flexibility for everybody. But again, that's just part of being human, isn't it? That's part of not having favourites. They need time and they need recognition for the additional roles that they take on. They need CPD that goes beyond box ticking. They need CPD that isn't just relegated to 4 inset days a year that are delivered just by whoever happens to have been on Twitter that day, and so you know that you can book them. It needs to be targeted. It needs to be relevant to what they are doing in their careers, because they've got a lot to be doing. And so they haven't got time to sit through behaviour management for the 15th time, particularly if they are the behaviour management mentor, particularly if they're the one that your school has decided does all of the coaching about behaviour management. They've probably got other things that they might be interested in learning about. And even if they do want to learn about behaviour management, they may want the more in-depth skills as opposed to the softer beginner skills. They need career development pathways that are not just promotions to management. They need career development. This is a big thing of mine at the moment, that career development shouldn't just be climbing the ladder, because not everybody wants to do that. But we do need that novelty. We do want those changes. We do want those different things. And most of all, they need space to breathe. They need recognition that they are in the stage of their career where they are most committed, most capable, and also they have the most stuff going on. And so they just need to be able to step out for 5 minutes and collect themselves and then be ready to be capable again. So today we kind of celebrated what it's like to be in the middle of your career. We've celebrated what it's like to be in your second act, I suppose. And so my challenge for all of you for this week is to do something that brings you joy. Do something that makes you happy. Put something in motion that's really going to make the second half of your life, or the second 2/3, or however it is you are framing your age and your life stage right now, better. Let's take a leaf out of Patricia Routledge's book. And I really hope it was her, because I love the idea that it was her that wrote that. And pick up all of the things now that we couldn't or didn't do when we were younger. I hope you all have an amazing rest of your weekend. I hope you all have a great week, and I will see you for breakfast next Saturday morning. Thank you all very, very much for listening. Goodbye.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.